Legend of the Jackal, Part 1. Alder Devlin peered over the edge of the ship. It had been hours since he had watched the coast of his home disappear into the distance. He was leaving his home of Massachusetts in search for answers. The ship swayed softly upon the Atlantic. The waters had gone from blue to black. At times he wondered if the ocean was still beneath him. He had passed most of his time staring through the waters, searching for strange oceanic life. He ignored everyone who came near him. Every greeting that was put forth went unnoticed to his ears. His body was surely standing on the deck of the Tila, yet his mind was lost in the deep unknown of the Atlantic. Sadly, it wasn't just his mind that had been absent. His heart had gone missing years ago. Ever since the day his brother Jack disappeared, he had a lacking of emotion. Eventually, Alder would grow too weary to stare endlessly into the sea. He had grown accustomed to going days without sleep, but even Alder Devlin had his limits. He retired to his chambers beneath the deck, ignoring all other passengers he encountered along the way. He seemed so strange to them, never saying a word or even glancing in the direction of a pretty lady. To the other passengers and crew members, Mr. Devlin seemed void of all emotions, any interest, and at times, even life itself seemed in short supply. To them, he seemed so cruel. Not only did Mr. Devlin not show feelings, but he went as far as to not invoke them in others. His face was so plain, nothing about him hinted at an intelligent being, nor was any of his features so harsh as to turn someone's face in disgust. Why, Mr. Devlin didn't possess a single physical oddity about him. He was nothing to laugh at or lust over. He was so plain and ordinary, to most people, he may as well not even exist. On Mr. Devlin's third day out to sea, he had no choice but to succumb to sleep and subject himself to the dreams of his past. They were always the same dreams, but now those dreams did haunt him. For Mr. Devlin, his past was a darker shade than his future. He could at least speculate of where he would be in a day or two. When questioned of his past and of his dreams, he was lost. He only knew that his past would continue to haunt his dreams until he found the truth. Whatever happened to poor little Jack? Alder Devlin closed his eyes and was soon caught in the bleak unconsciousness of his past. The dreams always started the same. Poor little Jack. He was sick again. Mr. and Mrs. Devlin had two sons. The oldest son they named Alder. He was a bright boy who showed a lot of patience when it came to the attention his parents would show his younger brother Jack. When Jack was born, he was the fussiest baby anyone had ever seen. Jack never seemed to sleep and would cry for days. There were only brief moments of silence for the Devlin family. Jack would cry until he was short of breath. There were even times when Jack would scream for such a period that the poor child lost his voice. In those times of silence, poor little Jack was a pathetic sight. Truly, something pained the young infant. Even without a voice, it was apparent little Jack Devlin was suffering. His infant limbs tried their best to claw out the evil that plagued him. These attempts would only lead to the horrible scarring across his stomach. Elizabeth Devlin, Jack's mother, had the boy strapped down to prevent further injury to himself. William Devlin exhausted the family's funds in an attempt to find a cure for his son's mysterious condition. Years passed, and the only answer given to the Devlin family by their doctors was that young Jack had a parasite growing inside of him. The parasite would feed off the nutrients Jack would ingest and leave Jack with just enough nutrients to live in agony. Jack had an insatiable hunger, or rather, the thing growing inside of Jack had an insatiable hunger. No matter what Jack ate, or how much he ate, he was starving. Jack did eventually attend school, and despite the grief he was given by the other children, he genuinely liked being out of the house. There was one child, however, who seemed to live only to torment poor little Jack. Harry Von Doss was a rather large child. He appeared to be a giant when compared to little Jack. On more than one occasion, Harry physically assaulted young Jack, who would be waiting for his older brother Alder after school. Usually these confrontations would end with Jack having a black eye or maybe a bloody nose. One of the last little bouts between little Jack and big old Harry Von Doss ended with Jack suffering 2 cracked ribs. Jack would have to stay at home for 2 months before he would ever go back to school. Alder was not at all pleased with young Harry Von Doss's actions. Though Alder was nearly 6 years older than Harry, he was only slightly larger than the Von Doss boy. Alder threw Harry to the ground and stomped on him repeatedly until he was nearly unconscious. When the young Von Doss boy was helplessly lying on the ground, Alder went behind the school shed and retrieved a shovel. It was clear by the look in Alder's eyes he intended to kill the bully of his younger brother. Fortunately, Alder was stopped by a parent passing by. Alder was expelled from school for the remainder of the year. Elizabeth and William Devlin were both very proud of their eldest son. Jack was furious, for as Alder loved Jack, Jack loved Alder even more. He didn't like Harry Von Doss to begin with. The idea that Alder wouldn't be walking Jack home from school anymore because of Harry made Jack absolutely enraged. Jack loved Alder. Jack hated Harry Von Doss. When Jack returned to school, he spent the entire day staring at Harry. Harry looked so smug. He was taunting Jack with his proud grin. After school, Jack waited for Harry to come out. He waited for quite a while. Harry had detention for the rest of the year due to his prior altercation with Jack. When Harry came out, he just smiled at Jack and walked the other way. Jack swallowed the pain he had lived with his whole entire life and ran towards the Von Doss child. Jack had never ran before. He had never had the strength. He pounced on Harry's back and did the one thing he knew how to do. He bit Harry Von Doss right on the face. He bit so hard that he tore a small hole in Harry's cheek. Both of the boys' faces were covered in blood when Mr. Smite, one of the school teachers, came running out. Harry was screaming and holding his face. Alder may have beaten Harry, but Jack made him cry. This pleased young Jack Devlin. Of course, Jack was expelled from school for the rest of the year. For the first time in his life, Jack was happy. It was a short-lived happiness, though. Jack disappeared a few days later. Everyone in town thought that Harry Von Doss, Harry's father, had done something with Jack. Henry was a bully himself. He was always threatening people who were behind in their payments that he was going to take their land. Henry was even known to have a violent temper. On more than one occasion, he had gone into the forest and assaulted the gypsies who would frequent those parts. He accused them of tainting the stream with poison and voodoo. When Henry was questioned about the disappearance of Jack Devlin, he of course blamed the gypsies. The police searched the woods for the gypsies, but only found evidence that the gypsies had not been in the forest for nearly a year. All evidence pointed to Henry Von Doss. It wasn't until young Harry Von Doss disappeared that most of the town dropped their suspicions of Henry. When Jane Garrett, the third child, vanished, the townspeople became very worried for the safety of their children. Over the next few years, children would go missing at an alarming rate. There were no leads, no evidence, and worst of all, no hint that the children would ever stop disappearing. Some blamed the gypsies, others blamed witches, while some blamed their neighbors and friends. Alder watched as the townspeople of Blackstone, Massachusetts turned on one another. Then he watched as his parents died of broken hearts. Stay tuned for part 2.